Hi, everybody. Today we're going to look at making adjustments to the local level of a image. Earlier, we talked about how to change the entire image global color or density using the curves, hue, and saturation and color balance layers. Here's, you can see that everything's been changed. But this time we're going to change only part of an image. Um, so I want to look at, this is the original image. I turned off all the layers over here. And what I like to, what we did with it earlier by increasing the contrast and giving a little bit more color saturation to the shawl and to the hair, but it also kind of gave it a little bit of a bump of color and saturation and a little bit of contrast to the background as well. But I do like the background being a little bit more neutral. So I'm going to turn these off. Actually, I'm just going to turn off this entire layer, and I want to start a whole new folder. And I'll show you a couple of dynamics that you can use with this device. So I can add another folder in here, and this is a very typical way for Photoshop folks to work, is that they have different looks by having everything organized in different folders. And the key is that you don't turn them all at one time. You turn one folder on for one look, and then you turn the other folder off for the other look. So this one here, I want to start working inside here. I'm going to use, I want to skip the step where I do the global, and I'm just going to go straight to the local. Sometimes it's one or the other. Usually you do global, then you do local. Sometimes you just need to do local adjustments. But usually if you start, you want to look at it globally and then work your way into the finer details. So, but before I begin, we're going to do what's called tracing this image a little bit. There's a couple of different ways to do this. I think the more accurate way is to do this by hand. Some folks want to use some of the quick tools. They work most of the time, but not all the time. There's a very quick way to do this. But the idea of this tool is that you get to select everything you want, and it's more accurate because you trust your eyes rather than the tools. So we're going to pull out the lasso tool. And the lasso tool is just basically you just left click and you just kind of trace along what you want to change. I'm going to do it in a slightly different manner because for me to go around with one lasso all the way around this image would take a long time, and there'd be a lot of errors. I'm going to just do small chunks here. I want to grab this part, follow this here, and then a lasso goes around in a loop. So you always come back to the starting point. I'm not going to be so detailed right now. I'm just going to kind of get the general idea. And actually, I'll show you some things that goes wrong with Photoshop very quickly. I'm just going to loop around this young person here and just kind of do the general outline. And again, I want to make sure the lasso comes all the way around. And what I'm doing is I'm doing sections at a time. Let me go back up real quick. I'm doing sections at a time. If I want to add to this section, I want to hold down the Shift key and the plus sign comes up. So for those who are following, this is what the Shift key is, or the key command is. That's the Control key, and that's the Alt key. So I want to hold down the Shift key and then just add to the section. And again, I want to make sure I do big loops because it knows where the starting point is, and you just got to come back a little bit close to the starting point. And once you let go, I'll add to the selection. Now, we'll get a little choppy. Usually I'm a little bit more fine-tuned than this, but just for the demo purposes, you'll get to see some of the effects of what happens when you get a little sloppy. You get a little sloppy around her hair a little bit. So this is very, akin to like highlighting text in a Google Doc or a Word doc, but instead with an image, you're selectively choosing what part of the image you want to control. So I got a little, so I want to zoom out. So now I have this kind of highlight around this young person. There's, if I were to do this for, a real project, I would actually be a little bit more exacting. I would actually follow the lines very closely. Hair, or working in the fashion industry, hair is the most difficult item to work with within Photoshop. There's multitudes of techniques to get around catching all the hairs, but I'm not going to get into that for this project here. You can also change, you can subtract a selection. So for instance, this is a selection right here. I have too much sky. I want to change that. I want to hold down the Alt key. And again, I'll just draw a little circle around what I don't want to be selected. And again, you want to do some loops and then come in and get very exacting. And this time I'm going to end right about there. And you can see that it's a little cleaner, a little tighter. Again, if I want to add, hold down the Shift key and then left click and drag the mouse. And I'm just going to, again, I'm not going to get too exacting right now, but so here, got the general idea. Once I have the marching ants, there's one thing you want to do at this point, and this is what we call feathering. And the feathering helps the edges look less choppy or cut. So for instance, I want to do it without the feather first. I go to my adjustments. I want to do, let's say, hue and saturation. No, I'll do contrast. Start off there. Again, I always start with the density first, and say I want to bump it up just a little bit. I want to do this drastically. And you can see that all I'm changing is everything within the selection. Everything else is surrounded it is not changing at all. Now, what you can also see are the hard lines of the edges. And this is a telltale sign for all Photoshop folks that an image has been altered or changed, because it's very quick and easy to do a selection, but then you get this, and then it doesn't look very realistic. So I'm going to back up a step, and you can see that you don't notice as much, but it's still there. Even the subtle changes can still see that hard line. So I want to back up. So this is where I introduce the history panel. So the history panel is actually recording all my steps, up to 50 steps, to whatever I do to the image. So I'm going to go back up here before I got to the last part of that lasso, right there. And this time I'm going to right-click on my mouse and get the control where it says Feather. And the feather adds a little, it kind of softens the edges a little bit. Oops, there we go. The larger the feather, the softer the edges will be. So I'm going to put in here, I'm going to exaggerate this, put 150 in here just for today. The lines will change a little bit. It gets a little softer, rounder. And then if I go back to my adjustment controls, let's say curves again, and I now push it up a little bit, you can see that I can push it up even harder. Again, the young person is changing, but the clouds in the background, the sea, are still staying the same. The edges are not as hard, but it doesn't really change the edges at all. It kind of keeps this kind of glow around the edges. Again, another telltale sign of Photoshop has been performed too much. But oftentimes, if you're just making a slight little adjustment, it's not going to be as noticeable. So I want to just kick up that contrast just a little bit like we did on the other one. That's for there. Now, there you have it. So you have before and after, and it's just that person's body changing, not the background. If we want to look at the other one, again, you have to kind of make sure which one's turned on, because you don't want to turn them both on because it doubles the effect. So there's that. That's what I did the first time around. and that's what I did the second time around. So I got that little bump. Still haven't got my saturation in there yet. Um, so one way to do this, rather than having to retrace the line again, um, to add another adjustment layer, I can actually put my finger on top of the mask. This is the mask right here. As you can see, there's a hole cut out here for the shape of that body. The white parts are what's going to change or be affected. The black area is what's going to remain the same. If I were to hold my mouse or hover my mouse above the mask, and if I push down on the Command key or Alt key for you PC folks, um, and just left click on top of that, it will actually reselect the selection using the based on the mask. So you already have it once, you never need to do it twice. Then I come up here and let's say I want to add some saturation to it. And this is where I might just kind of bump it up a little bit here, like that. Like that. So now I have this, here's the before and after with all my layers. It's just changing the body parts. If you're examining this really closely, I can already see this kind of glow part right around here. That's just from the over feathering process. Feathering takes a little bit of time to get used to and get to navigate which one's going to be the best for an image, but it takes a little bit of practice. So there's before and after. Now let's look at what happened. So there's what I did the first time around with no adjustment layer, no local selections whatsoever. And then there's my adjustments for just that person. So the background kind of stays, you know, the original scene. Now, let's say I want to exaggerate that a little bit. So let's reverse this. So again, I hold down my Command key on top of a mask and left click, and I get my mask back. Now, what you can do is at this point right click and say select the inverse. So it's going to swap it. And what you see is that the mouse or the marching ants kind of go around this area now, the background, and stays, you know, as free of the young person. So if I come back over here, and this one I'm going to, again, I want to just put a density layer on here. And you can see over here in your adjustment panels, the layers are different now. Here's the one for the person, and this one's going to be for the background. So let's say I want to make this background just a little flatter overall. Now I want to push this to extreme so you kind of see what happens here. Now you see, if you look here, you see the glow around this person's body. That is still, that white part is actually still the original image. It's starting to glow because the control has been pushed so hard that the mask is a clear indicator that the mask is not very tight to the person. And this is where, like if I was doing this for real, I would actually have that line, that marching ants really tight along the edges here. And then the masking would be like anywhere between like 5 to 8 pixels. So it just, the transition is like almost not pure snap cut, and between one or the other, it actually kind of edges in just a little bit. So I want to always, you know, for Photoshop retouches, you want to minimize this glow. And again, that's a tight line, and playing with the feather a little bit to make sure that the line doesn't show up. Let me reset that. This time I want to just do what I intended to do, is to kind of make this a little flatter. So a flat image is lights and your shadows are kind of bright and your highlights are kind of flat and darker. Okay, so again, this is contrast, increasing your highlights and your shadows. Oops. Sorry. There we go. And then I want to make this just a little flatter. Okay, now here's before and after. Here's the after. Here's before. So I, you know, made the background a little flatter, and I popped up the contrast or the color of the person in the foreground. So it kind of flips it around. Um, the other thing I'll show you here is that you can put multiple points on this line. It's not generally recommended to put multiple points on. And then when you start doing this kind of thing, it looks cool, but it also is a clear indicator that someone has no control over the Photoshop controls. It's maybe good for one thing or one effect or one use, but otherwise, on a day-to-day use, it really has no positive results or positive attributes in contribution to a project. Um, and I always tend to um, recommend use no more than 2 points on the line. And the easy way to get rid of a point is to hold down your Command key and click on top of the point, and the point will disappear. So those are the ways that you can use your selection tools and your adjustment layers to control parts of an image, the local parts of an image. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, thanks.